something bad to us, we are going to do things to you that have never been done before.
This was a fork in the road of human civilization.
Well, howdy, folks. You might be asking yourself, what's Vince doing here? Where's Carl? Well, that's a good question because Carl's been busily sorting out some issues, as you probably would have gathered from last night's stream, that he's had some issues about where he's living, and there was a death of a lady, unfortunately, on the property. And, of course, now that's all being dealt with today. So Carl really wasn't in the headspace to come and do this show. So he said, Vince, do you want to have a go? And I'm having a go. So all I have to say is welcome to everybody. Just let me pull up the comments, see who's actually in here today. A lot of people. Who was first in? Oh, I can't get to the top. Sandy K, first person in today. So well done, Sandy. Welcome along. And hello, Tony, and quite a few others. We've got a 2 or 3 subjects that we're actually going to talk about tonight. So the first one, obviously, which I'd like to bring in a very, very good, well-renowned member of the public who understands the Constitution, Mr. Tim Dwyer. So let me bring Tim on board. Hello, Tim.
Hey guys, how you doing?
So
glad to be here, mate, and thanks for asking me to come on.
Well, yeah, short notice, mate. I just pulled on our friendship rugs a little bit, said, hey, mate, I need you on tonight. I'm by myself. So, so Tim's coming to us from the wonderful, lovely state of Victoria today. I'm not sure what he's doing over there. We may have to lasso him and bring him back to South Australia where he belongs. But anyway, one of the main things that occurred over the weekend was the wonderful little show that happened at Canberra. What do you think about that one, Tim?
Well, I think it'd be very, very, very interesting, and for a number of reasons. Firstly, to Peter and Don, their band team of putting everything together. Now, a lot of people would sit there and say, yeah, great. Grand jury thing, what's that going to achieve? We can't arrest anybody, blah, 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 blah. At the moment, that be correct, right? But there was a lot done that people not necessarily understand. Firstly, there was the document of the failure of fidelity. Now,
Judy. Tim, can I interrupt you for a sec, mate?
Yep.
You've got a bit of a poor connection there. May I suggest you drop the video camera off and just speak?
Okay. How do I get to the video camera?
It should be down on the bottom of the screen. It will say stop cam. There we go.
Okay. All righty. Any better?
Yeah, that's better, mate. Carry on.
Beautiful. Well, it's just that I'm out in the bush in central Victoria and I'm running off the phone, so it is a bit tricky. Okay, so fiduciary duty. What the heck is fiduciary duties? Well, an occupier must look after the people they occupied. They have a fiduciary duty, just as a magistrate or a judge should have a fiduciary duty to the accused in a court of law. Now, the judges and the magistrates don't worry too much about that anymore, and neither politicians, because we have to understand that they've been doing this for probably 60 years, and the great majority of people are asleep, and they don't know that the fiduciary duty to take care of them, provide for them, do no harm to them, all this sort of stuff is an international obligation that a belligerent occupier has to the people they oversee. And so the document of the fiduciary duty was put together. And I can tell you, the names on that list are staggering. The other side of it is the brief of evidence Peter put forward, and Peter and Donna put forward on the weekend. I was privy to that prior to it going out, was beautifully done. I'll put it that way. It was beautifully done. And it was done in such a way. Now, you can't put everything on this brief of evidence because it would look like the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. But
I was wondering about that.
Yeah. Well, again, the document, if you were to cover every aspect, the document would be massive. Nobody would read it, right? They couldn't read it. It'd be worse than War and Peace. And so they covered the major points that proved that the criminal cartel called the Australian Parliament, or the Parliament of Australia, including the Liberal Party, Labor Party, and all other parties, have broken the law wholesale. Their evidence produced was sufficient. They showed every oath of the Prime Ministers, a link to it, that how every Prime Minister since Bob Hawke has failed to swear the lawful oath, so they're outside the.
But isn't that lawful oath only relative to the Prime Minister? I mean, to the position they're going into, that's not actually specified anywhere in the Constitution, is it?
Yeah, it is. It's Section 42 says that every member of the House of Representatives and every senator must, before taking office, swear the oath or affirmation as what's prescribed in the schedule of the Constitution.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the one that's at the end of the Constitution that swears oath of allegiance to Her Majesty or His Majesty of Great Britain and Ireland and whatever, correct?
Correct. None of them, not one member of Parliament. Bob Hawke, I believe, was the last man to swear that oath. And when you watch the video of Bob Hawke saying that oath, I tell you what, he had vinegar in his mouth that day. It was just evident that he was not a happy man swearing that oath. And, don't forget, Vince, we've got Bob Catter on radio telling people he's never sworn the lawful oath according to the Constitution, because he's never going to swear an oath to some toff in England.
Yeah.
And so in his own words, he said, I might not even be a politician, and he laughs about it.
Well, theoretically, he's not if he hasn't sworn the oath. But I mean, a lot of them, when they come in, and although I don't believe they do it correctly, and there's plenty of videos out there, when they're taking their initial oaths to be in the office of either a senator or a cabinet, on the cabinet or the lower house, they stand up there and somebody says the oath for them, and they say, I so solemnly swear, and then sign the document. But they don't actually say, my name, blah, 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 blah.
Then so they haven't sworn the oath.
That's the way I read it, yeah.
But
that is the oath. Sorry.
The senators, they swear that they say the right words, the senators do.
Right.
Now, the oath says you've got to swear the oath to the Governor General or some other person so authorized to take the oath, right? Now, the senators will take their oath in front of the Chief Justice of the High Court. Now, we know, according to the Freedom of Information Act, that the Chief Justice of the High Court has not taken the lawful oath. So even though they're in what's called the High Court, they are not lawfully there. Secondly, when they take the oath and they say the right words, they must, it's to speak and subscribe, meaning they must sign the oath, right? Because, and I spoke to Alex Antic about this. We had a meeting one night and I went through this with him and I said, now, Alex, you're a lawyer. I said, the oath is a contract between you and the people, correct? He said, correct. And I said, a contract must have a signature on it Otherwise, it's null and void. I said, you never signed the bottom of the oath. You went and signed a book, a registry, to say that you'd taken the oath. So therefore, there is no signature on the contract. And he looked at me and he thought for a minute, and his words were, oh, shit.
Yeah, that's what I thought they would be.
Right? So these people, they just go along. They don't think. They've lost the capacity of working out where the hell they stand. But anyway, so getting back to what Peter's done, Peter and Donna, they put all this evidence together, and the common law process was held, and everybody voted that, as you would expect, that these people were guilty of this process. They wanted to go forward and then lay charges. Now, we know in common law today in Australia, we can't go and arrest them once, even when we have the trial. We can't go and arrest them. So what the hell's the use of all this process? Well, it's an interesting process. Let me go back and have a look at what's happened in the last couple of days. Elbow Sludge Easy had a phone call to Donald Trump. And I wasn't privy to the phone call. I didn't get the extension. But I'm guessing that Trump would be talking to him about internet access for 16-year-olds and everybody else without digital ID, freedom of expression. There you go, right? The freedom of political and religious expression that they've all now come out with, and hate laws and all this sort of stuff. I reckon Trump might have had a word with him about that. And I reckon Albanese would have told Trump, listen, you stick to doing what you're doing. I'll do what I want to do in my country. 2 hours later, we have a 25% tariff on anything we're going to send to America. Now,
yeah, really smart.
So how does that then tie into what Peter Horton's doing? Well, it's simple. You look at what he's doing, and it'll be the largest grand jury in the country and in the country's history, probably. Then when they do the trials, whoever that's been served on will be found guilty. And it's now getting much closer to when we go and initiate our process of stepping back into the parliament. And we'll have our 100+ people to take their seats. We'll declare the parliament.
Isn't the whole idea of this, once this is done, it's to be sent to the international courts?
Oh, yes.
The human rights, etc.
This is going to the Human Rights Commission. This is going, like the list of where this is going is huge, right? And so when around the world, like Argentina did it, Trump's doing it, we'll do it. We'll bring the country back to its proper foundations. Trump will bring America back under the proper republic. England will get it done in some period of time over there. And all the common law type countries will find themselves back under the proper jurisdiction of their constitutions, under common law. And when that happens, every one of these people who have been through this process that Peter and Donna have put on the docket, they will be found guilty because their crimes are indefensible. Then when that happens, it's just a matter of going around and collecting them, I think. That's the way I see it. But the weekend, I think, the numbers could have been a bit greater, but look, I think it was an outstanding success. Some people were worried that the police would get rough-handed and all this sort of stuff would break out. But I don't think that was ever going to happen because from their perspective, they know that common law doesn't have any real legs at the moment. but they're not seeing what's coming around the corner.
But even if you don't take into the fact that everybody agreed to indicting these people, but just basically looking at the evidence that was portrayed and the timeline in which it was done and how it was done, it was almost irrefutable, wasn't it?
Oh, Vince, I know, look, a lot of people, they're time poor. They don't have time to go and research all the stuff that us crazies get down to. But, you know, they actually, the people on the call and everybody else out there, they probably resemble humans a lot more than you and I do. When you know, we just get lost in this stuff some days. But when you look at the timeline of what went on, let me just throw a couple of things out there for people to think about. The Constitution says that you need royal assent and crown authority to coin money.
Yep.
Right? To coin money. Okay. We've been stamping coins since 1966, and the coins are in actual fact counterfeit because we don't have crown authority to do it. Think about that. Every coin we've got, and just speaking of coins, let me throw this in. The coins previous to King Charles, the monarch had a crown on her head and she was facing right. King Charles has no crown on his head and he's facing left. What do we make of that?
Well, someone said to me that there's never been any coins with the king wearing a crown anyway.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, why was the Queen wearing a crown?
Special, maybe? I don't know. It was just something that was raised by one of our commenters in one of the other shows. So that the fact that there was no coin, that the king doesn't wear a crown, but he does. So why shouldn't it be on the coin?
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's just by the by. And when you look at the timeline of the process that these people have pulled off, we have to understand that Bob Hawke, being a member of the Fabian Society, and the Fabian Society's motto is socialism by gradualism. Inch by inch by inch, by day, by week, by month. And when you look at how our society has changed, and it's all right for me, I'm old, you know, I can look back 60 years and remember the differences. Okay. And in doing that, what we see as the country of Australia today is nothing like and I'm not talking about technology or any of that stuff in per se, but just the attitudes of the people and the way people behave in this country today is totally different to where we were 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so we change gradually, and we were always told when we went out, don't talk about politics and religion. They're two subjects that are taboo, but they're the two subjects that we should have been talking about to keep these bastards honest. But you cannot make an honest man out of a criminal. You just can't. He's beyond it, right? So when you look at the timeline that Peter put there with the information and all the evidence, 1973, when Whitlam took the Commonwealth out of everything, and on my last video, I pointed out how they, with the stroke of a pen, took the Great Seal of the Commonwealth out and replaced it with the Great Seal of Australia in 1973. They took the Commonwealth of Australia out of the Geneva Convention and put Australia into it. Like, this is just, there's 115 pages of that stuff. And when you look at that, we have to understand we were conned, we've been ripped off, we've just been, yeah, look at that. There you go. There's the referendums. Yep.
Yeah. So each one of these referendums in blue that you can see here, they're all being passed.
Yep.
Right. Now, if we actually zoom in, we can see the dates that they were passed. Hopefully everybody can see that. So up on the above, we've got there in 1973, the Australian government went to the dark authorities. The Royal Styles Act in 1973 required a referendum. So if we go and look around 1973, we have a referendum for pricing that failed, for incomes that failed. Where's the Styles Act?
Yep. No referendum.
No referendum. The same for the one for 1986. Let's look at 1986. 84, 84, 88. Where is it? So
where's the Australia Act?
Yeah, and that's the one that recognises the Queen of Burleigh Lake, I believe.
Yeah,
is that how you
Burleigh Griffin. Yeah,
Burleigh Griffin. Sorry, my apologies. But that just goes to show what we're trying to say here. I'll stop that screen share and bring that no-headed Tim back up on screen. But okay, so in this situation, does that mean that a lot of these politicians are swearing an oath to a foreign entity or a foreign power? Or
absolutely.
No power at all?
We've got to look at this. The Parliament of Australia is under the control of the United Nations. Let me explain. In the United Nations Charter that we've signed and agreed to, apparently, that the Australian government is not to use their own funds for major infrastructure works of any sort. They are to borrow it and pay the interest on it. Right? Now, the United Nations is a foreign organization. You and I cannot vote for anybody on it or in it. And yet that organization is telling our executive what they are to do and how they are to do it, so as that the country becomes bankrupt and we feed the money monster. So therefore, Section 44 says that if anybody is under the influence of an international or a foreign entity, they can't sit in Parliament. Hello, hello, hello.
Well, speaking of hello, as part of the Commonwealth, I know that the government or the courts at one stage said that Great Britain was classed as a foreign power. But how can that be? Because we're all part of the Commonwealth.
In Hill versus Sue was the High Court case that you're referring to there.
Right.
And in Hill versus Sue, they ruled that the United Kingdom was a foreign nation separate to Australia. That's because in the structure of what Whitlam put in place in 73 and then the 86 change to the Australia Act. Now, you've got to remember...
2 illegal acts, I might add.
Oh, yeah, unlawful, totally unlawful, right? In 1986, when Margaret Thatcher, when the Australia Act was read into... Well, let me go back 2 steps. Prior to the Australia Act taking place, there's a gentleman who lives in Melbourne. He and one of his friends went to Western Australia because the Western Australian Constitution stated that for them to join with the other states to become a separate independent federal nation, Western Australia needed to have a referendum to be able to step out, right?
Right.
Terms of Court at the time told them to get stuffed and bugger off. He wasn't interested. Queensland also, their constitution, and I've got in my back office somewhere here, I've got copies of both of this. Queensland also had to have a referendum. So these guys take off, go and catch up with Joh Bjelke-Petersen, who was a staunch constitutionalist and a staunch monarchist. And Joe was beside himself. But what had happened was his advisors told him that he couldn't do it because the Queen had already been invited. She was coming out. They can't change all that. So just, you're going to have to let it go ahead. So they did. Now, when the Australia Act was sent to the UK to be read through the UK Parliament and made part of the English law, these two guys went to England. Now, I've got a copy of the letter they sent to the Queen. I've got a copy of the letter that the Queen sent back to them saying, I'm sorry, we cannot have an audience with you. And then these two guys were in the gallery in the English Parliament on the day that Thatcher read the Australia Act into law. Now, when Margaret Thatcher started reading the Act, she stood up in front of the English Parliament and said that the people of Australia have all agreed, including the referendums required, to become a sovereign, independent federal nation. Now, one of these guys, Paul stands up and he says, Madam, that is an absolute and total lie. I am from Australia. And so she stopped. She started again. And she said exactly the same thing again. And he stood up again and said, Madam, that is an absolute and total lie. There was no referendum. I am from Australia. So then she had to stop and start again. At this time, the police have come up to the gallery and are standing fairly close to them by now. And she starts to read it for the third time. And when she gets to the part where that the people of Australia have agreed, blah, 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 including the required referendums, right? He stood up and said, the cock has now crowed 3 times in the great Parliament of the United Kingdom. And the police ushered him out. Now, so Margaret Thatcher, whether she knew or didn't know, she lied to the Parliament. Secondly, when it was proclaimed, and forgive me if I've got the date, it was either the 2nd or the 6th of March in 1986, she proclaimed the act into law, but that's a Sunday. Now, in England at that time, there was a thing called the Sunday Observance Act was in place. And the Sunday Observance Act says that you cannot hold Parliament, you cannot hold an assembly, you cannot do this on a Sunday because that is the Sabbath day. You cannot do commerce on the Sabbath day. And she proclaimed it on Sunday, I think it's the 6th of March, 1986, in direct violation of their own law in Parliament. But on the same day in Australia, the Queen was presented with it and she signed the top of it and told Bob Hawke to take it to the people. Again, now the Queen is bound by the Sunday Observance Act. So the entire Australia Act from the
would have been
English...
Saturday over here or a Monday over here.
Yeah, but that's right. But in England, it was a Sunday. And you can't do it. She broke the law. And so
then she signed it on top of the document. That's not signing the document. That's just witnessing the document. Isn't that correct?
That's just witnessing that she had seen the document. Bob Hawke then runs around waving this thing around like a bloody flag, saying, well, the Queen's given it her assent. No, there's no royal assent. There's no seal on it. There's no stamp on it. It's as good as a roll of toilet paper. But because the courts are fraudulent, because the High Court really don't care, right? All this sort of stuff. This is why we have to bring back the country under its lawful constitution. After we get back under our lawful constitution, yes, it can be changed, but can't be changed the way Gough Whitlam changed it and Bob Hawke. It can't be done that way. It must be done via the people, not the stroke of a pen.
Yep. Okay. So for the basic people, this was a really good start on laying out with the evidence, but not being too heavy. Would you say that that would be a fairly good comment of what happened from Saturday?
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be a very fair comment, and that the evidence that was laid out, anybody who cared to read those couple of pages, if they couldn't understand it, I'd say they failed primary school.
Well, that's education. That's a whole nother subject in Australia, which we can talk about later. Okay, so overall, generally speaking, looking at this, you think this was a positive move in the right direction for people?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
If there was anything else that you would have liked to have seen explained on that Saturday, what do you think that would have been? Or anywhere else that somebody might want to research?
Yeah, look, I saw this today on an email that I sent to you, and I don't know whether we got it put up there or not. And I've had a quick look for it. On the document that Peter presented, there are links to all the Prime Minister's oaths, swearing their oaths.
Yep.
Now, I don't know whether we've actually got that on our website, on ourtrueaustralia.com. I don't think we do.
So
But
that was, in case the audience are wondering, that was Tim telling me that I need to put it up on his website.
Yeah. But anyway, what I would have liked to have seen, if it was possible, was to have had a screen and a projector, and each of those oaths only go for 2 or 3 minutes, and to run the visual and audio effect of each of the Prime Ministers swearing the unlawful oath, committing treason. I would have liked to have seen that. But apart from that, ripper reader.
Excellent. All right, let's just jump off that subject and on to another one, which is, please excuse the cat meowing in the background, guys. I'll deal with that while Tim starts to explain something he heard about just recently to do with carbon tax. Tim, take it away. Excuse me, people.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, guys. The elbow sleeves bucket government and Chris Bowen and his wet dream, they've come up with this concept of a carbon tax on new cars coming into the country because we don't have any of our own. Now, remember, when Australia had their own manufacturing, they were our vehicles were efficient. They were pretty good. The only reason they weren't selling well is because the government was not having a proper tariff on the foreign stuff, and it was coming in cheaper and everything else. Now, think about this. Let's say you're a tradie or a farmer, and you want to go and buy a new Toyota diesel Hilux, right? You will pay, according to Chris Bowen's idiocy, you will pay an extra $18,000 carbon tax for the CO2 that car will put out in its lifetime. Now, if you buy a Toyota Corolla or a petrol one, you'll only pay, I think it's $4,000. But you will pay a carbon tax on every new vehicle that comes into Australia, except you got it 100% electric. So what they're trying to do is ram the prices of ordinary petrol and diesel vehicles up to match that of the supposedly green electric vehicles. Now,
Right, which costs thousands of dollars to replace the battery in 4 or 5 years' time or 10 years' time. So
not only that, Vince, it's been shown over and over and over again that CO2 is not a issue in anything. If we look, let me get this across. At the moment, as a lot of you probably already know, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is 0.04% of the entire atmosphere.
correct.
Now, if we get down to 0.025%, life as we know it ceases to exist. Why? Well, you know those funny things outside that have got branches on them? They're called trees and plants and grass and everything else. as they take in the CO2, one of the things they're kind enough to do is give us some oxygen to breathe. Now, we don't get all our oxygen from there. We get a lot of the oxygen out of the ocean. I understand that. But let's go back the other way. On Tim's Truth on Rumble, if you scroll back 3 or 4 pages of videos, I think there's about 10 videos per page. If you scroll back a bit, you'll find a video of a little dog. There's a little dog on the front of it. It's just a little terrier dog. You have a look at that video, and the guy on there has done all the graphing and showing you where they cherry pick the data to show that, oh God, it's so hot over here and we're having heat waves like we've never had before, which is rubbish, because if they'd have taken the data a few years earlier, the heat waves were far greater, the droughts were far longer, and they cherry pick all the data. The other thing he shows, that in the ice cores, they've found that during the Jurassic Age, the CO2 in the atmosphere was about 4 times higher than what it is currently. The trees were bigger, the plants were bigger, the fruits were bigger, right? We need more CO2, not less. Why do you think the greenhouse guys buy massive tanks of CO2 and pump it into the greenhouse? Because there's not enough in the atmosphere to let the bloody fruits grow. And so they put it in artificially. And so this concept of charging us more for our utes and our cars because of the CO2, give me a break. I mean, truly, it is just a communist tax. That's all it is. It's just Orwellian. And, you know, I've shown on our stuff, like with the H2 systems, we reduce all the carbon. Like I pulled up somewhere the other day and I was talking to a bloke and he looked down at my exhaust pipe. He said, "What the hell?" And I go, "What are you looking at?" He said, "Your exhaust pipe." And I go, "Yeah." He said, I said, "It's pretty clean, isn't it?" And I put my finger in the exhaust pipe and showed my finger, and there was this slight, just grey little tiny bit on there. He said, "How the hell do you do that in an old Commodore?" Of course, I had to lift the boot and show him, right?
And that's the picture that's showing right now. That's the exact unit that's in the Commodore.
That's it. It's sitting there, right? That's in the boot of my car. Anyway, he goes, and I showed him the unit, and he goes, "Well, what the hell's the government bitching about CO2 for?" I said, "Oh, no, they don't like me." And they said, "Why not?" I said, "Well, think about it. We reduce the fuel consumption, we reduce the emissions, and they can't get a tax out of it. That's all it is. They can't get a tax out of it."
So that unit just shows that was Tim's H2 unit from out of his car. Now you saw there for the quality of the build. It's not something that's just off the net, you know, with a couple of bottles and generating and putting in some feeds to make it, what's the word I'm looking for there, Tim? Where it generates the gas?
Yeah, it just makes it into a kettle. The ones on the internet don't have any controls on them whatsoever. It's just pure amperage, and it'll suck as much power as you can give it. And they just turn into steam.
Yeah.
And you're pumping steam into your engine. As
you said before, there's a delicate balance and a mix. And it took you a long time, if I understand, to find out what that balance was, that mixture. Is that correct?
Yeah, mate, it took a long time. In actual fact, we cheated, right?
Don't tell people that. You're not supposed to say that.
Well, if you look up on the internet and you type in jet propulsion lab at Caltech University and type in H2, hydrogen, you'll find a paper there from Professor Giordini. Well, by the time we got going, Giordini had died, but his work was still in the jet propulsion lab. So we rang the jet propulsion lab and thought, well, maybe they'll just give us the information we're looking for. I mean, I don't know. If you've got to ask, right? So Anyway, the bloke explained he couldn't do that. That's right. This all belongs to the Jet Propulsion Lab, and we can't do this and we can't do that. Oh, okay. And so, because I wanted to know how much was a small amount, according to Giordini, right? I said, that's all right. I'll ring you tomorrow. He said, what are you ringing me tomorrow for? I just told you I can't help. I said, well, I don't know. Maybe tonight when you go to bed and sleep and think about it, you might wake up and go, no, I will help that bloke. He said, that won't happen. So I rang him the next day, and I rang him the next day, and I kept ringing him. And we sort of became phone friends. And I said, well, look, can you give me a rough guideline as to how much is a small amount? Anyway, he coughed and gave me the right starting point. And from there, we worked it out. But so each car has a different amount of hydrogen that it needs based on its fuel consumption as it gets going. And so, yeah, we worked that out. And but the system does do good. And, you know, I just saw a post come up there that we are carbon based and we must have carbon to live. That's right. We are carbon, all of us. And unfortunately, you and I are the carbon that Bowen and Klaus Schwab and his mates want to get rid of.
Yeah, well, I must admit from over here in Mannum, even now, I mean, the last couple of years, I actually have a green lawn during summer. Green lawn. Usually it's a dead lawn, but we're doing a bit of watering, but things are just greener at the moment. Now, I'm just guessing that it's probably because there's a higher carbon level, but that's just a guess. I'm not saying it is. And for those who are interested, that is the big unit. That's the one that goes on the trucks. You want to tell them a little bit about that one, Tim, if you can see it?
Yeah, well, it's basically double plus of the car unit. So instead of having one canister to produce the gas, we've got two because trucks need more hydrogen. And these are the electronic boxes that drive it, 2 boxes, 2 canisters. And again, if you have a look on our website, on the H2 Fuel Safe website, you'll see a truck there. It's a Freightliner with a C15 Caterpillar in it, pulling Harris refrigerated trailers. And this guy was driving from Brisbane to Perth, road train, double trailers, and back again every week. And in the first 2 years, he saved $100,000 worth of fuel, and fuel wasn't the price it is today, I can tell you. And we did the testing. We did the testing with that unit down at the dyno in Adelaide. They had a big truck dyno down there, and they tested it and verified it and measured the emissions and the fuel consumption and everything else. And in doing that, the South Australian government proved that what we were claiming was correct. And guess what? The South Australian government won't even buy it. And now, a while back, the South Australian government wanted us to take the data that we paid for that proved all that sort of stuff because it had their logo on it. They wanted us to take it down and not use it. I said, get stuffed. We paid for it. We're using it. Yeah. But it's good. I mean, there's hundreds of trucks out there that we put that on. Yeah.
So the question being, there's a lot of people say, though, if you don't, for the amount it takes to generate it, it's not actually a saving at all because you've got to allow for the extra torque that's required for the alternator and all that sort of stuff. And how can that convert to a positive result at the other end if you're actually having to put more torque in to generate the generator to generate the power to hydrolyze the hydrogen?
Well, that's a good question, and I couldn't tell you how many times that different people would bring that up and say that you know the law of thermodynamics says you can't do it. Well, what we've done is you understand this, and I'm not being a smart ass when I'm saying this, is I wasn't in school in the day they taught physics. I wasn't there when they taught thermodynamics. I wasn't there when they taught electronics or engineering. So therefore, I didn't know what was not possible, right? So when we decided what we were doing this and we had to get a bit serious about it, we knew we needed electronic control to be able to keep the amount of hydrogen fairly precise. So we finally found a guy down in Melbourne, and I went down, we saw him, we had a meeting with him. He said, I think I can help, but I need to get somebody else in here. And he brought a guy in the next meeting we had, and he was the head of the electronic engineering department at Melbourne University. And I told him what I wanted, and he said, "You know nothing about electronics, do you?" I said, "No, not a clue." I said, "But I know what I want." I said, "All I need to know is, can it be done?" Well, he said, "It'll be expensive, but I can do it." Right? Now, it was expensive, but here's what we've done. Right? Let me explain to you. We have taken 12 or 24 volts off the host engine. Doesn't matter which it is, right? Then we bring that back to our electronic control module, and it's basically like a buck converter. We break that 12 or 24 volts down to 3 volts. That 3 volts then allows us to have a much larger amperage available to us.
Yep.
So we're now at 3 volts, and we have some amps to play with. So then we can put 5 amps, 10 amps, 20 amps, 30 amps in, but we're still only pulling 3 volts, right? So in the Commodore, as an example, I'm pulling 7 amps. So I'm pulling 1.8. I'm putting 7 amps from the electronic control module into the canister, right?
Yep.
I'm pulling 1.8 amps off the battery.
Which is not specifically huge.
No, like your parking lights would probably use 2 amps, right? And so when we then put the hydrogen that it produces into the combustion chamber in sufficient amount to burn all the fuel, then we have, and the guys at the Adelaide University, Dr. Dr. Bari, they did a test on our unit, and they wanted to do a white paper on it. And all I could do was I could take the unit down, help them set it up, and then I could not participate in the test because that might compromise the test.
Yep.
Bari had the unit for 2 weeks, and then he rang me up and said they'd finished the test. You can come down and get the unit. So I went down, there it is in his office, and I said to him, "So how long will it take you to put the white paper together?" And he looked at me and he smiled. He said, "We will not be doing a white paper." I said, "Why not? That's what you wanted it for." He said, "If I do a white paper on your unit," he said, "I will never work in a university anywhere in the world." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "Mr. Dwyer, you know why not." He said, "You are 200 times over Unity, and that is a physical impossibility, and I cannot put a white paper out on it." Right? So the bottom end is that when you work it out, the amount of what they call parasitic draw for what we put out the other end, we get 200 times better out the other end than what we draw off the host. And that's why our system is different to anybody else's.
Right, which every scientist in the world is going to say is not possible.
Correct. Absolutely.
Right? Thermodynamics, physics, etc. says it's not possible.
But you got to understand, it's the rule of thermodynamics.
Yeah. Well, we know that rules are easily bent, but yeah.
Yeah. So, and I didn't set out to do this purposely. I just set out to try and make this thing so efficient. And that's why it produces so little heat and everything else. And because I didn't know what I wasn't supposed, like, I didn't know it was impossible.
Yeah, no, indeed. Now, I know that the other point to that being, even if you're drawing a little bit extra out, the fact that the whole hydrogen process gives A, more torque, and B, is a cleaner exhaust, isn't that exactly what we're looking for? A cleaner exhaust, not as much CO2 and whatever?
You'd think, but nobody in the government wants to talk to us, Vince. We've tried and tried, and we have tried and tried. And nobody, nope.
So why do you think, this is a really pertinent question. So why do you think that people in Australia, trucking companies, etc., haven't taken up this option? I mean, it's been out there for a while. The evidence is there. Is there pressure coming from somewhere else or what?
Well, yes and no. Look, you see it from different perspectives. I won't mention the trucking company, but we put one on again. It was on a Cummins 15-litre Cummins and cattle truck, and the results was 12% fuel savings. Now, 12% fuel savings on a cattle truck when they're burning thousands of litres a week is a lot of money. He was saving about $2,300 a month, right? So I said to him, I said, well, how about we put a few more on? He goes, oh, geez, I don't know. And I said, well, you've got the figures in front of you. They're your figures. Yeah, I know. He said, all right, we'll put one more on. So we put another one on. Right? Now, he's only got 30 trucks, right? So that works. And he said, well, I said, why don't we just put them across the fleet? I said, you can, we've got a finance arm. We can set it up and you just pay them off with the fuel savings. Tim, he said, look, I know what I'm looking at on my spreadsheets on the fuel figures. I know that the drivers are telling me the trucks are pulling better. I know that the exhausts are cleaner. But if it's that good, why hasn't the whole industry jumped on it? And if so, what am I missing? What am I missing? I'm missing something that other people are seeing because they're not jumping on it. Right? Now, I have no answer to that. Right? I have no answer to that. And then when through an interview or an appointment we had with the South Australian government, and they wanted to know some bits and pieces about it, I thought, oh, beauty, we'll get on the South Australian government fleet. That'll be a good start. And they asked a similar question. At this stage, we've been out there for 5 years.
Right.
And they said, you've sold this many units, yep. And why hasn't the whole world jumped on it? I don't know. I said, maybe it's because I'm not good at marketing. I said, I can make them and I can design them, but I'm not the marketing whiz bang. I don't know. And they said, well, look, we'll hold back and wait and see. Nobody wants to be the first out the door.
Yet
I don't know.
It's so proven. I mean, there are so many testimonials that you've got from people who are using it and whatever on those that have. Now, my understanding is that you have a few units available at the moment. Is that correct?
Yes, mate, we do. We do indeed.
Right.
We do indeed.
Anybody who's out there.
I tell you what we'll do. I did a special for Christmas. Right? I'll do it again.
Okay. This is unknown to me, folks. This is new.
They're because of everything else going up and going up and going up, they've all gone up. But
yeah.
So we're basically at $3,900. I'll do Voice of Freedom for $3,400.
Oh, I can see Corinne smacking you in the back of the head right now.
I know, right? $3,400, right? I've got 4 that I'll do for $3,400.
Okay, you hear that, people?
But there's only 4, and I'm not, because it's all economics, like I've got to live, everybody's got to make a quid.
Yep.
But because of the association we've had with you guys and the group that are on here and stuff like that, look, I know that it's still $3,400, but at that at that I can tell you my profit margin
is not much. I sort of know that already. It's a wonderful offer, Tim, and the Voice of Freedom crew really thanks you for that. Basically speaking, it's worth it. I had one on my Pajero a long time ago, and I really should get one on my Commodore if I had some money to spare, which is like most people. And that just made that Pajero. So much more powerful. Matter of fact, remember, I had to bring it back to you and you had to tune it down because it threw me nearly in the back seat at one stage. So,
Yeah.
but guys out there, if you've got diesel tractors or trucks or whatever, even a four-wheel drive unit that's using diesel, perhaps it's time you sent an email through to h2@vofhq.com and have a chat with Tim, see what he can arrange for you. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So outside of that and his wonderful knowledge in the Constitution, I'm sure we'll have him back to discuss more as things progress. But at this stage, I better let him go because I'm pretty sure Corinne's going to belt him around the head for what he just did. Right? We love you, Corinne. Please don't hurt him too much. But we'd like to say thanks, Tim, for coming on and having a little bit of explanation about what went on with the thing on the weekend. I'm having a little mental blank there. The indictments, that's the word I'm looking for, or indictment, actually, if you want to spell it correctly. And with that, any other wise words of wisdom before we leave, Tim, or before you leave?
Well, everybody out there is on their own journey and everybody's got their own set of circumstances, and the world is kind to some people at different times, but just be kind to yourself. Remember that you're not just one being, you're four people. There's the warrior part of you that just wants to fight. I get that. But you've got to let the warrior rest a little bit sometimes, right? Then there's the magician part of you. You know, that part you might have forgot about it, but it's that part of you that just, you see something and you can just take advantage of it. You can just snatch victory out of thin air in different circumstances, but your warrior has overshadowed the magician. Let your magician out a little bit. Just let things come to you and grab them when they do. And don't forget that then there's the other part of you, which is the lover. The lover part of you is not just the lover, but it's the lover of all men, the lover of all things, the lover of everything. And don't forget to express that the love that you have for other people. It's not just a love between a man and a woman. I'm talking about like the love I have for Vince, for this bloke. Right?
Careful, boy, careful.
Yeah, but you know, sometimes we forget to tell people how much we appreciate each other. Let the lover have a say as well. But then again, there's that other piece, which is the sovereign part of you. And the sovereign, our sovereign is the supreme servant. The sovereign is not there to rule over anything. The sovereign is there as the supreme servant.
Yep.
And because we've been tied up with the warrior for so long, a lot of us have forgotten the sovereign servant of who we are. And it's important that we learn to serve others and serve ourselves some kindness. Thanks, Vince.
Excellent, Tim. Thanks very much. We hope to see you when you get back here to South Australia. Don't be too long or I'll have to come and get you. All right, mate.
Thanks, mate. Bye.
I'll leave it with you, and thanks for joining us on the show tonight. I've got a couple of other things that I need to bring to point. Firstly, there's this.
Hi, are you passionate about supporting independent media and social events? Voice of Freedom is dedicated to bringing you the latest happenings and things that matter. But we can't do it without your help. By donating, sponsoring, or becoming a member, you're not just supporting our mission. You're joining a community that values transparency and engagement. Your contributions allow us to continue producing high-quality content that informs and inspires. Visit VOFHQ.com to make a donation or explore sponsorship or membership opportunities. You can even donate using crypto. Together, we can amplify voices that deserve to be heard as we continue to create a vibrant platform for social change. Go to VOFHQ.com, help us to help you by joining us and making a difference today.
Now, if I didn't play that, Carl would have kicked my butt because I always threaten to kick his if he doesn't play it. So there you go, people. That was the ad that we put together. So please look, try and help support us as we go through, continuing to bring you information and news. Now, one of those pieces of news, I know that we're at the hour mark and we should probably be getting off, but I found this today, and it's all to do about housing. And this one's a little close to the heart because my son, who's 31 years old, is trying to buy a house. And have a listen to this.
Tax law amendment, build to rent bill, and capital works, build to rent misuse tax bill 2024. Now, this is a bizarre priority when the nation is very focused on housing issues, whether you are a younger person or an older person. To have a government in Canberra for almost 3 years to have prioritised giving a tax cut to foreign corporations, foreign fund managers, could be BlackRock, Vanguard, it could be a sovereign wealth fund, to give a tax cut to foreign entities so that they can purchase Australian houses and construct houses in this country that Australians will never, ever own, is beyond bizarre. Now, this model of perpetual renting, underpinned by this government has decided that it would prioritise the interests of foreign fund managers over the punters. That is the reality. And that is why it has now passed through, in a guillotine, at the end of last year, a bill that prioritises the interests of foreign fund managers. Because this, of course, suits the foreign fund managers, but it also suits the great benefactors of the organised labour movement today, the super funds. It suits them down to a T. And in fact, in a public hearing into this bill, I was able to ask the Association of Super Funds what they thought of the idea. And I said, do you think the Australian people want to rent their house from a super fund? And Mr Clare, who was the official from the ASFA, said, I think that they would be very happy with institutionally owned residential property. Now, I think that Mr Clare is wrong, and I think the government has a warped set of priorities because it is a government for vested interest, which is underpinned here by this agenda. Now, Cameron Murray, who's an independent economist, has said that most houses in Australia today are owned directly by Australians. 67% are owned by homeowners and over 30% by private individuals. And then there's public housing. But the whole idea of build to rent is to turf the individual out and to bring in the institution. And that's what you do when you run the country for 3 years for a few vested interests.
Okay, so that was Andrew Bragg, Senator for New South Wales, just talking about housing now. It becomes an issue when, I don't know, there's a lot of people in our chat, I don't know how many are young or how many are old, but just how difficult is it now to raise enough money in the bank as savings so that you can afford to buy a house, right? It's almost impossible. I mean, with the current cost of living prices of petrol, like petrol in Adelaide went up to $2.04 from $1.63. I bought it out Friday night. How can we afford those changes? How can we afford to save money towards a house? So we rent. Unfortunately, rent costs more than buying a house, but you can't get the savings to buy a house. So, you know, I hope he doesn't mind, but basically, no, I'm not going to say that. I'll keep that to myself. But effectively, he's had to reach out for help to get a house at 31 years of age, working for near on 18, 13 or 14 years now. So really, what is the government doing? Housing, we know it's important. Maybe we should stop bringing in as many people to take up the houses that are already there and allow our Australians to get back to work, get back to saving, and bring our infrastructure back to this country where it needs to be. Trump's got it right in that respect, right? Build it here. Build it here. Make it here. Have it here. Worst case scenario, if we get a whole heap of boats that go and circle all around us, at least we'll still be able to survive. Anyway, guys, unless you've got any rather quick pertinent comments, I say thank you very much for putting up with me tonight. I don't have Carl's low, dull, dulcet voice, but hopefully we'll see Carl back here tomorrow. working with you guys, and it's been a pleasure to be the interim co-host or the host for tonight. So once again, look at what's happening, look at your life, look at who's around you, and wherever you can, pay it forward. Unlike those dickheads that we see occasionally on the road while I busily try and find the ending part. Here it is. Bye.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back. Does anybody else want to stay? Let's ride!
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I'm going to have more than 300 in the gauge. All the velociraptors are just happy to be out of the pen. Yeah, that looks like that's fully overflown. It certainly is. There we go. Full. Full. Look at that.